everybody, how's things? Hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, so this is my 300th video. Okay, so I privatised some of them in the past, but yeah, all intents and purposes, this is my 300th video. So I just wanted to landmark it by talking about some of my earliest influences and what actually got me into playing in the first place. So how far do we go back? I mean, you know, I've always been interested in music from being very young. My dad used to play saxophone in a dance band, jazz band, years back, a long time ago. And then it was around the time that my grandfather died, which is like, yeah, quite a long time ago as well. He inherited some money, and he bought a Hammond organ, and the idea was that all the family would be learning how to play it, and etc, etc. I mean, before that we had a piano, and the piano, I used to like it because, I mean, I was only about 2 or 3 at the time, but you know, I used to like playing on the keys on the piano because it was nice and soft, and you could get, you know, it just felt nice. And but then of course he sold that, and then of course I remember my grandma, she used to tell me off because I used to put my cars on it, and in my own way I was playing this game where, you know, like you know, you get these groups of notes, like you get like an octave of notes here, an octave of notes down here, and it was like you're getting in the car and you're going from this world here to this world here. So already, even from that young age, I was kind of like starting to visualise music and you know, see music in terms of like space and colours and you know, pictures and that kind of thing. And yeah, there's a lot going on musically. Anyway, so but we got the organ, and I found it was too hard to play. It was hurting my fingers because I was only small at the time. I mean, now I've got sort of quite biggish fingers, but in those days, you know, yeah, it was hurting my hands. So I just remember just crying, you know, it's like going to my mum, going, oh, I can't do it, and you know, that sort of crying that all like young kids do, you know, where that's sort of like, you know, you got the sore throat and like your nose is running, I can't do it. And my mum was saying, well, don't give up now, because, well, you regret it. And of course the thing was, little did I know that my mum had been trying to learn how to play it, and she was getting frustrated because she had a family of kids to look after. So my dad was kind of a bit upset with her because she hadn't kept it up, and I was giving it up. And my younger sisters, they were both too young to play. But my brother, he carried on playing it, and you know, and he's very bright, my brother, and so for years he kept it up, you know, and he's got really good at it. So anyway, you know, trying to cut a long story short, we grew up, and I go to bus. When would it have been? I was sort of in secondary school. Now, when I was in secondary school, there was this whole thing about, like, you know, you seem to be judged about what type of music you liked. I mean, I liked all types of music. I didn't like to restrict myself, but I did like a lot of classical music. But you in those days, it's like the early 80s. You were either you had to be a mod or you had to be a rocker, and it was a lot of it was coming off the back of that Quadrophenia film, which is kind of odd, really. I'll tell you why I think it's odd in a moment. But you know, somehow if you were supposedly a mod, then you like bands like The Jam, and but you also like ska bands like you know, like, what's it, like, you know, like things like Madness and things like the Specials and things like that. And of course, you know, that. And then if you were a rocker, then you liked Iron Maiden, and you liked AC/DC, and you know, Judas Priest and Motorhead, and it couldn't be that sort of you liked one of these, you know, like one record that these people have put out. It was sort of like, if you like that, then you were bound for life into that style. And oh, it's terrible. You know, it was really that shallow, the way it was. So But then I remember once my dad, because he was so interested in like the electric organ. He took me and my brother to we went up to Manchester, the old Free Trade Hall. We went to see this guy called Harry Stoneham. And if you know anything about the organ, you remember the old Parkinson chat show? Well, Harry Stoneham used to do the music for that. So I went to see him, and I thought this is really good. I mean, of course, it's it was a tie-in because he was doing he was like it was always sponsored by this organ company and whatever, and it was like bigging up the latest models and whatever. And so kind of like instead of like guitarists congregating in music shops talking about Ibanez serial numbers and whatever, it would be organ fanatics talking about serial numbers instead. So anyway, I mean, I remember I went back to school, after this, and I said, "Oh, I went to see Harry Stoneham last night. It was really good." And then somebody goes, "Oh, really? Oh, come on. Why didn't you just say? Why you could have gone and said you went to a Madness concert, and people would like you a lot more for that." And I was thinking, well, it seems odd if you just liking music just to fit in. That just seems really naive. You're missing out on so much. If all you're interested in just this little sliver, then you're missing out. Anyway, things progressed and whatnot, and and as you can probably gather, I wasn't, in the early years at secondary school, which is I'm not sure what you call that. That sort of age where you're sort of 11, 12-ish. Yeah, so I wasn't all that popular then at school. But there was a friend of my brother's, and he was getting into like Deep Purple and Rainbow and stuff like that. And of course he'd heard that my brother, he was getting quite good at the organ. So he came round, and there was another friend who was like taking up the drums. And the idea was that I'd learn the bass guitar. Ooh, right. Well, maybe we'd have a band. And then of course, meanwhile, my music teacher would be pushing. I originally wanted to learn the trumpet, and I gradually got pushed towards playing the E flat bass, and it's kind of like a tuba looking thing, and I absolutely hated it. And even then, I mean, it wasn't the best time in my life, because I knew there was all this really interesting music going on, and of course I wasn't going to learn how it was done. So anyway, I'm sort of digressing a bit, but so this friend of my brother's, he came round, and he had this Fender Stratocaster. It was red, like with a rosewood fingerboard, and I thought, wow, that's but I mean, I'd heard about this thing, but it sort of reminded me of the sort of thing that like Hank Marvin used to use, and of course I knew about the Hank Marvin and the Shadows, and I used to like them growing up. I mean, I was a big Thunderbird fan, and if you ever seen like the original Thunderbirds movie, there's a bit of Cliff Richard Jr., but it's Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and they've done like puppets of them in that, and so I'd known about the Shadows from that, and then of course those Cliff Richard films, and Cliff Richard was very popular in the 80s, so that kind of like sowed the seeds of things a bit more. And at some point, I think we went to see the Flash Gordon film when that came out, and Queen, Exhibit A, my lord. Queen, they did the soundtrack for Flash Gordon, as you're probably aware, and that sort of put sort of rock music in my mind as well. And then at some point we got a record player, and my brother was starting to bring sort of these various Deep Purple and Rainbow records home, and I'm not sure how many times this friend of his with the guitar and his other friend with the drums, I'm not sure how many times they came round. I just remember once that John, that's my brother actually, he'd found this patch like John Lord, and if you actually turned it up, it was sounding sort of almost sort of authentic sort of John Lord sort of sound, whereas this friend of my brother's with the guitar, it wasn't that great at the time. I mean, I don't know where he is now. I don't know. but I don't think he's out. He's not been out. He's not exactly been out doing like G3 concerts and being signed by Mike Varney or whatever. So I'd be interested to know what actually happened to him. But I mean, I just remember him playing bits of stuff like. He just went, and I thought, why is he playing why is he playing when the Saints go marching in? Which goes, I'm not going to attempt to play that. But of course, I didn't know that he was playing Number of the Beast, because he wasn't actually doing like the triplet. He hadn't actually got the triplet pattern down yet. But anyway, I mean, so there've been a few of these sessions going on. I think I'm not sure. Maybe it's just been that same one that just dragged out for a very long summer afternoon, and my brother was getting bored because it was all kind of like trying to play bits of songs, whereas my brother was so far ahead at the time. And so of course that wound up this lad who was the guitarist, who was like a big Ritchie Blackmore fan. And being the big Ritchie Blackmore fan, there's the whole thing about being the moody and like manipulating people and blah 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 blah. And not long afterwards, of course, there was a bit of a big falling out between my brother and this lad, and anyway that was that. So that was one thing that set things in motion. And then of course there were some of my brother's friends. They were coming round, and we got a record player. And we were saving up pocket money and birthday money and getting records. And I think I'd seen the Queen live at the Milton Keynes Bowl that had been on. But at the time it was just after they'd done that Hot Space record, which so my brother was saying, oh, we don't listen to Queen anymore. They're doing like funky disco music now. They're not a rock band anymore. But seeing that Milton Keynes concert, it kind of changed our minds, because it is quite a good concert. There are one or two Spinal Tap moments in it, of course, but generally, yeah, it was quite a good concert. So that was on my mind as well. We were getting into Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There was a really good record library near where we lived as well. So we were, Derek and the Dominos, and so on. And then like BBC Two, they were doing like this series called Rock School, which is about, it's like a series about learning to play instruments in a band and getting a band together and stuff like that. It was re-edited for the American market. It was called Herbie Hancock's Rock School, so you might have seen that, and it's on YouTube anyway. And then they were having in that they had some footage of like Gary Moore, and he was demonstrating like all different pedals and like his guitars and things, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And one episode actually finished with like the Gary Moore Band, and it was actually, I was wondering why it was called the Gary Moore Band when they actually had sort of quite high profile players in. You had Ian Pace on the drums, Neil Murray on the bass, Don Airey on the keyboards, and Gary Moore on guitar and vocals. And I was thinking, well, why is it called the Gary Moore Band? Why not just call it themselves something else? And I think this is partly one reason why I was getting more into Queen as a band, because it was more about actually functioning as a band, as a unit. That all four members of Queen were writing the songs, and they're all good players, and you could almost like pick your favourite member of the group. Compared with say like Rainbow, which is kind of like you knew it was Ritchie's band, even though you had people like Ronnie Dio and Jolene Turner and you had all these you had these players, but they were kind of like they could only get so far with it, and it didn't seem to be evolving in the way it could have done. So I was getting more and more into Queen, and then I think it was we went away on holiday, one year, I think it was either 82 or 83. We went to Torquay, and we saw Jim Davidson, like the comedian. But it wasn't just like telling jokes and stuff. He was actually does like musical numbers, and he has like a backing band. and he had a female guitarist, and she had like a Gibson Les Paul Gold Top, and I thought, oh, that's a really cool guitar. She was actually quite a good player as well. But they were doing things like, you know, Devil Went Down to Georgia, and you know, and a few standards as well, and you know, and that was kind of impressing in my mind. And then when I think it was like either the next year or the year after, we went to Newquay, and while we were staying in the hotel, they were showed the Queen 1975 Christmas concert, and I thought, wow, this is brilliant, this is amazing. And it was from then on, it was kind of like I was just, you know, I just had to get a guitar. And so Christmas 1984, I got was it a Hondo Les Paul copy. It wasn't a brilliant guitar, and you got like this sort of little practice amp with it, but it was a start. But in order to do that, I gave up playing the E flat bass. I might tell you more about that a bit later in another video actually. And I saved up like my birthday money, and I was just scrimped and scraped every single penny I had, and then that was like a combined birthday Christmas present, and you better start practicing it now, or it'd be a waste of money or whatever. And I was away, and then the thing was, you know, as I was saying at the start, this whole thing about tribal patterns, because the more I was learning, the more I was realizing, well, this is silly, because like you know, if you're a mod, you know, the original mods were groups like the Yardbirds and the Kinks, and yet, oh, and the Who as well. And then like one night later, I mean, I always liked the Who, but I think it was Channel 4 or ITV, they used to do these like late night videos where you could video them or you could stay up, and they had that Live in Texas concert. And I thought, well, if the Who are a mod band, why are they playing heavy rock music? That doesn't make any sense at all. And then, as I'd started playing the guitar, I was getting into like early Led Zeppelin. And I still think, you know, probably I know I like a lot of the Led Zeppelin records, but I think like my favourite one is the first one. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's that transition. And then, because like somebody at school, he lent me this Yardbirds album, and it was like the New York City Blues, and I thought, this is great, but it sounds almost like a Led Zeppelin song. And then of course I actually was learning that that the Yardbirds, you know, because they changed lineups so often, they became the new Yardbirds, and then ultimately they became Led Zeppelin. And a lot of well, I don't know a lot of, but a few of the Yardbirds songs, you know, like Dazed and Confused, they had actually been Yardbird songs. And then I remember I was trying to tell somebody at school who was like, you know, he was adamant that he was this mod, and I was saying, yeah, but well, what about like Led Zeppelin? And they said, well, I don't care about Zed Zeppelin, and he was deliberately saying it wrong. And I said, well, they used to be, they grew out of the Yardbirds, and but they said, oh, Zed Zeppelin, who are they? Oh, I never heard of them. And then he had this thing about, oh yeah, well, like mods play the music differently, and coming up with all these silly excuses where really that fight, that battle, you know, between what type of music you like, that was won long ago. You know, I mean, there was some documentaries about the Beatles, you know, and the Sgt. Pepper stuff, and you know, and that 60s era, which you also know, if you've been following my channel for long enough, you also know I'm a big fan of that. You know, that sense that, you know, that rock and roll could have changed the world, but it certainly made an impact. But even during that time, it didn't matter what style of music you were playing, as long as it was like rock and roll. You know, ultimately, that was the message. You know, yeah. So basically, that's pretty much how I started playing, and you know, and there was, yeah. So I mean, there's so much, you know, because I've been playing like for 39 years now, on and off, and I've covered so many different styles and things. So I might do a part 2 about this, because, you know, I did have a phase where I sort of went off the guitar for a bit, but I might tell you more about that another time. And then of course there was this thing, you know, that taking up the guitar as well, that seems to have like changed, you know, I mean, first of all it gave me a fair bit more confidence, but it sort of changed the way that people used to speak to me. You know, you're looking at an E flat bass to school, and you're a bit sort of a bit quiet or whatever, then people are going to think of you one way. But then you sort of like, you start talking about, you know, like yeah, I've got this Les Paul copy at home, and you know, I'm getting into like sort of, you know, sort of blues rock stuff, you know, like Cream and Eric Clapton and early Led Zeppelin, and I like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I like Queen, and you know, and so on and so on. Although for a while Queen weren't that popular, they'd gone off the boil. I think it was only like it was because of the Live Aid concert, you know, that like before that Live Aid show, it was like, oh, you don't like Queen, do you? Ooh, you know, it was pulling faces, and then some of that sort of you know, having played the Sun City thing, that didn't do them a lot of favours either. But it was, you know, after the Live Aid show, that had changed things as well, because, you know, I knew that they had something, and then suddenly everybody else is going, yeah, Queen, they're really good, aren't they? So it was almost like almost like a two-facedness, you know, and I never really got that either. You know, that I understand that you can change your opinion on things, and you can grow out of certain styles of music or whatever. You can also sort of learn to appreciate things and what have you. But I just didn't really get that. You know, like where, you know, why is it people like music to be cool rather than they like music because they like the music? You know. So yeah, I hope that was enlightening. I'd love to hear your stories. You know, what got you into playing? You know, tell me about that. You know, like who were your earliest influences? You know, what was it you got from them? And we don't write great big essays. You know, just a few lines or whatever. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. That really helps me out. I'll see you next time. All right, thanks for watching.